Anything can happen on the unpredictable stage of Saturday Night Live, but that's not always a good thing. Over the decades on the late-night institution, various cast members and guests have gotten themselves into hot water. These are the biggest SNL controversies of all time. It's a bit of an unspoken rule that there are just certain topics that remain off-limits on TV. Martin Lawrence learned this the hard way in 1994 when he delivered a salacious SNL monologue in which he critiqued women's genital hygiene. After the episode aired live on the East Coast, the West Coast in turn received a heavily edited version that cut out those jokes. To this day, it's basically impossible to find an uncensored version of it online. The Los Angeles Times reported that NBC received almost 200 complaints regarding the monologue. The network subsequently barred Lawrence from NBC programming for the time being. Lawrence didn't seem angry about the response, but he did question whether or not it fell into the realm of bad taste. As he put it to the LA Times, "I saw Alec Baldwin playing a camp counselor and licking a little boy's fingers. That seems worse to me than what I had to say." In 2020, Lawrence appeared on the radio show The Breakfast Club and jokingly commented that he didn't give a damn about whether or not he's banned from SNL, while also noting that he wasn't in fact banned. He then added, "NBC realized the way it went down wasn't what they thought, and then they sent me an apology letter." In the middle of SNL's first season, creator Lorne Michaels booked a high-profile guest host who would hopefully boost the show's rookie ratings, the ever-provocative Richard Pryor. The episode remains legendary, but at the time, one particular sketch proved to be too shocking for America. Starring Pryor and Chevy Chase, the word association sketch features an employer doing a word prompt test exchange with a job applicant. The scene escalates to the point that the two exchange a slew of tense racial slurs back at each other. It ends with Chase casually dropping the N-word and Pryor responding, "Dead hunky." Writer Paul Mooney, who penned the sketch, later reflected on its impact and importance in his memoir. As he put it, "It's like an H-bomb that Richard and I toss into America's consciousness. The N-word as a weapon, turned back against those who use it, has been born on national TV." Decades later, Michaels confirmed to the New York Times that the sketch, quote, "defined the show and put it on the map. Despite its divisive nature, it remains heavily influential. As comedian Dave Chappelle put it, it changed everything. Not only TV, but also my course, and it gave me the direction my life was meant to go in." In 2020, an SNL sketch featuring Jimmy Fallon wearing blackface while doing an impression of Chris Rock resurfaced to renewed outrage. In the actual sketch, Regis Philbin, played by Daryl Hammond, is auditioning potential replacements for his departing co-host, Kathy Lee Gifford. Fallon issued an apology for the blackface on Twitter, calling it a terrible decision, and adding, "There is no excuse for this. I am very sorry for making this unquestionably offensive decision, and thank all of you for holding me accountable." Fallon even took a week off from hosting The Tonight Show to deal with the controversy, and he then returned with an episode addressing it.
But the thing that haunted me the most was, how do I say, I love this person? I respect this guy more than I respect most humans.
For his part, Rock heard and understood this sense of love and called Fallon a great guy in an interview with the New York Times. He confirmed that he and his fellow SNL alum are indeed friends, while noting, "I don't think Jimmy Fallon intended to hurt me, and he didn't." He likewise told The Hollywood Reporter, "Jimmy Fallon doesn't have a racist bone in his body," while ultimately writing off the incident as bad comedy. In 1992, the basement-dwelling hosts of Wayne's World aimed an unpleasant swing in the direction of then 12-year-old first daughter Chelsea Clinton. The sketch in question featured Mike Myers as Wayne and Dana Carvey as Garth, discussing the daughters of politicians. While Al Gore's daughters were referred to as Babraham Lincoln should they ever become president, Bill and Hillary Clinton's teen daughter was called, quote, a babe in development. The sketch drew public criticism from viewers and then First Lady Hillary Clinton. Myers reportedly wrote an apology letter to the Clintons, while Lorne Michaels said, "We felt, upon reflection, that if it was in any way hurtful, it wasn't worth it. She's a kid who didn't choose to be in public life." At the time, the Clintons were understandably extremely protective of their daughter and her right to enjoy a personal life outside the public eye. In the week following the sketch, Bill Clinton even commented on Chelsea not accompanying him to a summit meeting in Japan. As he explained, she didn't want to be a big object of public interest. The Wayne's World incident wasn't the only time that SNL may have gone a little too far when joking about public figures. In a 2018 Weekend Update segment, cast member Pete Davidson opened a can of worms when he chose to mock the eye patch of Dan Crenshaw, who was a congressional candidate in Texas at the time.
You may be surprised to hear he's a congressional candidate from Texas and not a hitman in a porno movie.
Crenshaw is a decorated Navy SEAL who lost his right eye in an IED blast while serving in Afghanistan, and he understandably didn't take well to Davidson's cheap shot. He tweeted, "I hope SNL recognizes that vets don't deserve to see their wounds used as punchlines for bad jokes." A week later, Crenshaw made a guest appearance himself on SNL, alongside Davidson on Weekend Update. Davidson apologized, and the two shook hands. Crenshaw then went on to win his election, and Davidson eventually went on to rescind his apology. In his Netflix special, Alive from New York, released 2 years later, he credited himself for making Crenshaw, quote, a household name, and called the joke harmless. He also added that his contrition wasn't sincere, and that he was forced to apologize. Back in April of 1996, the SNL team somehow didn't anticipate that an openly political band by the name of Rage Against the Machine might just clash with the episode's guest host, Steve Forbes. The billionaire publishing executive was hustling a Republican presidential campaign at the time, and he represented basically everything the band stood against. Inevitably, Rage were ready to live up to their reputation, which ultimately meant hanging upside-down American flags from their amplifier grills as a protest against Forbes. It was a gesture that wasn't exactly well received. As Rage guitarist Tom Morello explained to the Los Angeles Times a week later, "We wanted to stand in sharp juxtaposition to Forbes by making our own statement." He also described Forbes as, quote, "a billionaire telling these jokes and promoting his flat tax." As Morello recounted, stagehands ripped down the flags just seconds before the band entered the stage to perform their song, Bulls on Parade. They were then asked to leave the building directly after their performance. The group was so livid that bassist Tim Bob threw torn-up pieces of one of the flags into Forbes' dressing room. Morello also called the people working on SNL cowards and bootlickers to their corporate masters. Responding to the controversy, Lorne Michaels simply said, "We really enjoyed having Rage Against the Machine on our show." In 2004, Donald Trump was at the peak of his time hosting The Apprentice. He hosted SNL for the first time that year, and then he returned to host again 11 years later. But the second time around, he was less of a reality TV star and more of a combative presidential candidate. He'd recently made comments about Mexican immigrants, quote, bringing drugs into the country and being rapists, which led to NBC cutting ties with him. But that didn't stop SNL from booking him as host. That decision led to no shortage of outrage. There were protests outside the NBC studios at 30 Rockefeller Center, and following the broadcast, reviews were not kind. USA Today called the episode a disaster and an hour-long campaign commercial, while Vox described it as bland and boring and toothless. After Trump was elected president in 2016, there were accusations that SNL had helped contribute to his electoral success. Comedian Anthony Jeselnik, for one, told the Daily Beast, "I think Lorne Michaels helped get Trump elected." In an interview with NPR, then cast member Taran Killam called the episode embarrassing and shameful, and noted that Trump was, quote, not an enjoyable person to be around. He refuted the idea that the episode helped elect Trump, though he did add, "But there's definitely something where it normalizes him and makes it okay for him to be part of the conversation." The Donald Trump SNL controversy still had plenty of life midway through Trump's presidential term, particularly when Kanye West was the musical guest in a September 2018 episode. At the time of his appearance, West was already courting controversy due to his outspoken support of and reported friendship with Trump. As the episode was ending, West went on a rant about Trump while wearing a Make America Great Again hat. This moment didn't make it on the broadcast, but Chris Rock captured it from the audience and shared it on his Instagram stories. West could be seen pacing on the stage as he unloaded the rant at the audience, while an organ played behind him. He declared at one point, "So many times I've talked to a white person about this, and he'd say, 'How could you love Trump? He's racist.' Well, if I was concerned about racism, I would have moved out of America a long time ago." SNL cast member Kenan Thompson later joked on Late Night with Seth Meyers that West held the cast hostage with his rant after the cameras had cut off.
He voiced his opinion very loudly.
Not a guy who's scared of his opinion. And
no, not at all. And, you know, we're all entitled to our opinion.
In 2021, billionaire businessman Elon Musk had established himself as a rather polarizing figure. He'd endured widespread criticism for incidents that included fighting Tesla staff over unionization, promoting coronavirus misinformation, and mocking the use of personal pronouns on Twitter. So, naturally enough, the announcement that he was going to host SNL led to immediate uproar. Some cast members even voiced their disdain in social media posts, which were later deleted. Despite the opposition from the show's cast and audience, Musk hosted the May 8, 2021 show as planned. His appearance was immediately hit with negative criticism afterwards. The Guardian declared that it would go down in history, quote, as one of SNL's worst episodes ever, while the AV Club mused that it was, quote, a 90-minute exercise in host-exonerating interference, featuring a long run of ego-fluffing humble brags for Musk. While the episode was panned critically, it was nevertheless a huge ratings hit, attracting an average of 7.3 million viewers, making it the third most watched episode of the season. However, it didn't score many brownie points for Musk's stock profile, as Forbes reported that in the week following his hosting stint, his fortune fell by more than $20 million. Just before the iconic Los Angeles punk band Fear was featured in the era-defining music documentary, The Decline of Western Civilization Part 1, they were simply tearing up their hometown at local shows. In 1980, John Belushi happened to attend one of their sets, and as lead singer Lee Ving later recalled to Rolling Stone, they had a couple of beers and quickly became friends. The comedian subsequently booked Fear for SNL's Halloween episode in 1981. He also hustled together a ruckus of audience members, made up of authentic punk fans, to enjoy cacophonous Fear tunes as Beef Bologna and New York's All Right if you like saxophones. During the band's set, a small-scale riot ensued on stage and consumed everything in its path. Equipment got damaged, and SNL producer Dick Ebersol was even hit by a pumpkin. The final straw was one punk fan grabbing the microphone and yelling, "F*** New York." An NBC technician called the performance a life-threatening situation to the New York Post, which also reported that $400,000 worth of damages were caused. However, Billboard reported that Ving had supplied the figure to the Post as a joke, with SNL spokesman Peter Hamilton confirming that they actually had to pay only $40 in labor penalties. Either way, the infamous performance went down in history, and Ving proudly joined the list of performers banned from SNL. Compared to Fear, legendary ragtag rock band The Replacements dished out a far milder act of punk rock rebellion during their 1986 musical guest appearance, but it nevertheless earned the group a spot on the Banned from SNL list. The inebriated set saw the rockers pumping their amps up excessively loud. Lead singer Paul Westerberg was caught screaming an off-mic profanity, and guitarist Bob Stinson wore a poorly fitted unitard so small that he accidentally flashed his bare behind at the camera. Lorne Michaels was reportedly furious, and he chewed the band members out for their behavior backstage. In the middle of his tirade, he noticed that the band had redecorated their dressing room, and we don't mean that in a cute and wholesome reality TV way. In the band's oral history, All Over But the Shouting, Stinson revealed that Michaels had given them free bar tabs, and that the band really went to town with that offering. As he recalled, they swore no band from Warner Brothers would play on that show again unless we paid the tab on the $1,000 worth of supposed damage we did. The performance is now remembered as both impressive and infamous. As Replacements biographer Bob Mayer put it to Men's Journal, it was both a brilliant moment and a kind of catastrophe. Though the Replacements haven't returned to the SNL stage, the band did make its return to NBC, with a far more subdued performance on The Tonight Show in 2014. Sometimes, a comedian doesn't even have to actually appear on SNL to create controversy related to the show. Such was the case with Shane Gillis, who was fired from his new position as a cast member in 2019, just 4 days after being hired. The incident that cost him his job had occurred a year earlier, when the stand-up comic made offensive comments about the Asian community during an episode of Matt and Shane's Secret Podcast, which he co-hosts with Matt McCusker. In particular, he was taken to task for calling Chinatown nuts and for using a racial slur. Gillis posted a since-deleted apology on Twitter, in which he explained that he, quote, pushes boundaries with his comedy and sometimes misses the mark. But this wasn't enough to save his new gig. Lorne Michaels issued a statement that read, After talking with Shane Gillis, we've decided that he will not be joining SNL. We want SNL to have a variety of voices and points of view within the show, and we hired Shane on the strength of his talent as a comedian and his impressive audition for SNL. We were not aware of his prior remarks that have surfaced over the past few days. The language he used is offensive, hurtful, and unacceptable. We are sorry that we did not see these clips earlier, and that our vetting process was not up to our standard. Gillis in turn responded, "Of course I wanted an opportunity to prove myself at SNL, but I understand it would be too much of a distraction. I respect the decision they made. I'm honestly grateful for the opportunity. I was always a Mad TV guy anyway." One of the most legendary SNL controversies actually took place entirely off-screen. The story goes that in 1978, a heated exchange went down between Chevy Chase and Bill Murray. Chase was returning to host that week, while Murray was a cast member. As Chase later revealed on The Howard Stern Show, fellow cast member John Belushi may have been feeling a little overshadowed by his former co-star's sudden success after leaving the show, and he'd supposedly worked Murray up by telling him stories that weren't true.
I think that Billy probably wanted to knock me down a couple of rungs, you know?
The verbal exchange soon turned physical. According to Chase, Murray jumped up from the couch and charged at him. Belushi then tried to break the fight up and got caught in the crossfire. Murray and Chase eventually kissed and made up, and even worked together on the 1980 comedy classic Caddyshack. As Chase tells it, they've even remained friendly since then.
I think we've made an effort over the years to get to know each other better and to put that stuff behind.
In October 2004, Ashlee Simpson experienced an onstage moment so intensely awkward that it transcends the history of SNL controversies. Simply put, it's one of the most cringeworthy blunders ever committed to any stage in music history. For her second performance as musical guest on the October 23rd episode, she was due to perform her song Autobiography. But as the band started playing, the vocal track from her previous performance, Pieces of Me, started blaring out while the singer's microphone remained at her side. She then improvised a few awkward dance moves before quickly leaving the stage, prompting the show to cut to an emergency commercial break. Simpson closed out the episode by claiming that her band had played the wrong song. A few days later, she called in to MTV's Total Request Live to explain that a bad case of acid reflux had led to her losing her voice, thus necessitating the use of a backing track. The response to the snafu was instant and rough. As Simpson recalled in 2018 on her e-reality show, Ashlee and Evan, "The world hated me for this SNL moment I had." But she also noted that the controversy only leveled her up as a performer and a person. As she explained to E! News, "I think things like that build your character and your strength, and it's how you handle them." You might have noticed by this point that Lorne Michaels is not someone who particularly enjoys moments of unscripted insanity on his show. Oscar-winning actor Adrien Brody was apparently blissfully unaware of this fact during his first, and quite possibly last, hosting stint on SNL in May 2003. That was when he decided to do his own thing while introducing Jamaican dancehall legend Sean Paul as the musical guest. Unfortunately for everyone, Brody's thing consisted of donning a cheap dreadlock wig while speaking in a poorly executed Jamaican accent. He also adopted a persona based on Jamaican stereotypes that involved him making an odd attempt at supposedly Caribbean slang. It might just be the most awkward 45 seconds in SNL history, even when you include Ashlee Simpson's lip-sync debacle. And the awkwardness didn't end there. In a 2012 interview with Moviefone, Brody gave some sharp and brief answers to questions about the episode, during which he admitted he had a great time on SNL and would like to host again. However, he also noted that he'd heard that he'd been banned from the show. Specifically, he said, "I've heard that. I don't know." According to Brody, Michaels didn't tell him anything backstage during the episode, so based on all that he knows, he's not sure how the story of him being banned got out. Not content with simply dropping one controversial statement within her opening monologue, Kristen Stewart showed up for her February 2017 SNL hosting gig and dropped 3. For her first bit of controversy, she took aim at newly inaugurated President Donald Trump. Specifically, she referenced the bizarre set of 11 tweets he'd posted years earlier, which urged Stewart's rumored ex-boyfriend and Twilight co-star Robert Pattinson to dump her because she cheated on him.
So to be fair, I don't think Donald Trump hated me. I think he's in love with my boyfriend.
Stewart then followed up this statement by calling out the president's anti-LGBTQ policies and accusing him of homophobia. As she put it, "Donald, if you didn't like me then, you're really probably not going to like me now. Because I'm hosting SNL and I'm like so gay, dude." Though Stewart had previously been open about her dating history, this marked the first time she'd actually confirmed her sexuality publicly, and she did it while openly trolling the President of the United States, so it inevitably raised eyebrows in certain circles. Then Stewart went for the controversy triple crown by ending her monologue with an accidental F-bomb when she got overly excited about being on SNL.
Because it's the coolest thing ever. Oh.
But really, this was the mildest bit of controversy, especially with the various toxic, chaotic, and destructive scenes we've covered so far. 2 years before he confessed to allegations of sexual misconduct, Louis C.K. drew the wrath of the internet in 2015 with an edgy SNL monologue that cracked jokes about child molestation. He recalled a child abuser who lived in his neighborhood during the 70s when he was growing up, and expressed his disappointment that he wasn't targeted by the abuser.
He didn't like me. I felt a little bad.
CK drew the ire of viewers for seeming to express sympathy for predators, while making their abuse sound insignificant. He mused that abusers' actions must feel really good to them if they're willing to risk so much. He also even compared this to the joy he himself experiences while eating Mounds candy bars.
How do you think I feel? It's my last show, probably.
Plenty of people were predictably incensed by the monologue. Numerous publications, including Deadline, asked if CK went too far. Opinions on Twitter ranged from it being, quote, the unfunniest, most offensive SNL monologue ever, to CK being a, quote, comedic genius exploring human nature. Either way, this hardly killed CK's career or his relationship with SNL at the time, as he returned to host again 2 years later. During his time as an SNL cast member in the early 90s, Adam Sandler cultivated his Canteen Boy character, a dim and cowardly assistant scoutmaster with a childlike disposition. During the Valentine's Day episode in 1994, he really pushed the boundaries of the character, in a sketch in which guest host Alec Baldwin played his troupe's scoutmaster. In the sketch, Canteen Boy is extremely uncomfortable with the intensifying advances coming from the scoutmaster. Baldwin's character coercively pushes wine on Canteen Boy and forces him to share a sleeping bag with him after he accidentally spills wine all over his bedding. The Boy Scouts of America were largely unimpressed, with a rep telling the Chicago Sun-Times, "We see nothing funny about child molestation," and are surprised that this unfunny subject would be selected for a comedy sketch. For his part, Baldwin revisited the sketch later that same year when he hosted again in December. He reframed the jokes as being about a, quote, perfectly intelligent 27-year-old as opposed to a child. He also mentioned that the NBC switchboard handled more than 300,000 angry phone calls on the night the sketch aired, although NBC denied that they'd actually received a significant amount of complaints. In 1992, 9 years before Pope John Paul II publicly acknowledged sexual abuse within the Catholic Church, Irish singer Sinead O'Connor sang a powerful a cappella version of Bob Marley's War on SNL. To top off the performance, she tore up a photo of the Pope while singing the word evil, and then implored her audience to, quote, fight the real enemy. Her message wasn't exactly well received. NBC reportedly received more than 4,400 protest calls. Several celebrities also had unkind responses. Frank Sinatra, for one, reportedly said that he wished to punch O'Connor in the mouth. Joe Pesci also addressed the incident in his monologue when he hosted the following SNL episode.
If it was my show, I would have gave her such a smack.
O'Connor revisited the performance in a 2021 Today interview with Carson Daly, in which she admitted that she struggled with complex PTSD from things that she'd experienced while growing up. She also noted that the photo she tore up belonged to her abusive mother.
It was a way of ripping her up as well, I guess.
Speaking to the New York Times in 2021, O'Connor likewise revealed that even though she suffered for the incident, she has no regrets. As she put it, "I'm not sorry I did it. It was brilliant, but it was very traumatizing. It was open season on treating me like a crazy b***." If you or someone you know is struggling with mental health, please contact the crisis text line by texting HOME to 741-741. Call the National Alliance on Mental Illness helpline at 1-800-950-NAMI 6264, at 1-800-950-NAMI 6264. Or visit the National Institute of Mental Health website.